In this session, we will look at coordinate geometry. Our objectives here are to, first of all, to review a review of the coordinate geometry related files, show you how to access coordinate geometry, become familiar with coordinate geometry dialog box, review the various coordinate geometry tools, and then become proficient in the use of coordinate geometry tools to store COGO elements. First, let's look at the coordinate geometry related files. The first one is the GPK file. This file is comprised of elements such as points, lines, curves, spirals, chains, parcels, and profiles. When the COGO calculations are complete, the results of those calculations are stored in this database file, and this file is a binary file. This file can then be used with many other applications. It's created whenever you first open the COGO session, or when you go through Project Manager. It can also be created from there. It is also appended throughout this process, throughout the design process. Things can be added or deleted from this file, and it can be used by many users at the same time, and only one file should be created per project. Now, the only variable here is the number symbol that you see in the job name, and this represents the job number. It can be 1, 2, or 3 alphanumeric characters and should be unique to the project, and it's defined by the user upon the creation of this file. The next two files, the IOC, the file name, number, IOC and OOC files, are files that we'll show you just a little bit later. The first, the IOC, the I stands for input file. The number is the job number. The OC is the operator code or user's initials. The next file is the OOC. The OOC is the output file, and we'll show you how both those files are created once we get into the Geopak coordinate geometry box. The last file down here is the .imp, or the input file, and this is a file that can be loaded into coordinate geometry and run from coordinate geometry. Things that are associated, or file that may be associated with such things as super elevation shapes or design cross sections. So let's go into a microstation file and look at coordinate geometry. Now, the access for coordinate geometry, access can be made from several different areas. We have on the left hand side the geometry pull down tools, and we can access COGO from here. COGO can also be accessed from your applications bar, applications, Geopak Road, and if we go down to geometry, coordinate geometry can be accessed from here. It's the same tool, just accessed from different places. So let's go into COGO from the geometry pull down. You'll notice that once we open this up, we get coordinate geometry, and it gives us the opportunity to put in a project name, a job number, an operator code, and the subject. What if you want that to be the subject? We'll put in video class. We're going to create a job number. We're just going to say 200, and we'll just call this VC, video class, operator code, and we'll say OK. Once we do that, the job number is created in our working directory. Now, as we look at the coordinate geometry box, first of all, we have some items up here, some tools up here that we'll look at in just a minute. The first row here is a row of commands. This row of commands is for the user's purpose of quick access to certain tools. In other words, store point command, point utility, things like editor, These particular tools are controlled from the View button. If we go to View, Icons, and customize this group, then when we select that, we get a list of all of the tools that are available. And you'll notice that some of these tools have a check mark next to them. The ones that have a check mark are the tools that you see in this area of the COGO box. The purpose of this is to give the user access or quick access to certain tools that you may use on a regular basis. In other words, instead of going to Element, Point, Store and getting this box, we can just go up here and say Store Point, and you get the same box. Once again, these can be modified simply by just coming in and selecting the tool that you use or that you want up in the top row up there. Select the tool from here. We'll say, for instance, if we wanted to do some spirals and store spirals, then we would select this particular tool. That's what the tool would look like. We say OK, and that tool is added to the group. Store spiral combinations. Likewise, if we want to remove icons from the group, all we have to do is come into Customize, and we, for instance, read all. We can take that out, and it removes it from the group. Well, the next little tool here is a tool called Navigator, and we'll look at Navigator in detail in a few minutes. The next is the Redefine button. Redefine has to do with changing any type of COGO element. In other words, if an element needs to be changed, a stored COGO element needs to be changed or deleted, the Redefine button needs to be toggled on. So we would just toggle that on or toggle it off as needed. Now, after saying that, I want to show you under Applications, Geopak Road, User Preferences. We have all of our user preferences that probably should be set up before the project. In other words, the unit system, we have English or metric. The coordinate values, we have northing, easting, or XY. Directions, we have bearing or azimuth. The station, we have 3 different station formats that we can choose from. Output accuracy has nothing to do with actual computation accuracy, but simply allows us to set the decimal places that we want the values to be seen on the screen. In this case, I've got these set to 2 decimal places. Then we have the working directory. In other words, this is our project directory. This would be the path where you would see the path to your project directory and where all the files are stored as well as accessed from. The feature preferences has to do with SMD file or survey management data. This is the point codes, line codes that the surveyors use out in the field whenever they're gathering data. Under COGO preferences, you want this to be set to query so that when you create a GPK file, it will go into your working directory and it will look in that directory for a file of this same name. If it finds one, it will come back with an alert box saying this file already exists. Do you want to overwrite it? You can say yes or no. And if it doesn't find one, it will tell you that it's not found and ask you if you want to create it, in which case you would say yes. You can also create separate directories in your working directory if you choose to do this for the GPK files and for your input and output files. This is not necessary. If it's left blank, then everything will default to your working directory. Redefinition of elements can be turned on here, but it shouldn't be. It should always be turned on from here. This should be toggled on. Force redefinition off upon COGO activation. And what this does, this should be toggled on. And when I toggle it on and say OK and OK, if I have Redefine turned on and I get out of COGO and I go back into coordinate geometry, then you'll notice that Redefine is turned off. This is a safeguard so that if you want to redefine a point or any type of element, then you have to go up and turn this on yourself. Right? You have different visualization options here. You got disable visualization, and visualization simply means an element when it's created is visualized on the screen. It's not actually drawn in the MicroStation file. It's only visualized. So disable visualization will not show anything on the screen whenever it's created, but it still will be created and stored in the GPK file. Temporary visualization will show until COGO is closed, and then the visualization will go off, and permanent visualization will be there until you close the file and open it up again. So we'll set this at temporary visualization. This off feature button, the browse and edit, have to do with the SMD file. For instance, if we go into edit, you'll see that we have the default SMD or survey management data file. If we go and choose, for instance, the point element, double click on that, then we have the opportunity here to come into points and select the point the way we want our points stored. In this case, we're going to select the just across the plus sign here. We can choose any particular symbology by clicking on this, setting it at a particular color, weight, style, and say OK. Once we change something in here, then we need to hit apply, and then we need to do file save to save that information into this SMD file. We can close that out. These buttons, these arrow buttons, are for navigating whenever we have information in this buffer right here, and we'll talk about where this is the output buffer. This will go all the way to the beginning, go back one line, ahead one line, or all the way to the end. This particular area right here is called your key in field, or it's called your input buffer. This is where the commands will be seen. And the execution, or the result of the execution of those commands, will be seen in this area, which is called your output buffer. So to kind of show you how that works, I'm going to go in and say store point, and we'll say point 1. You've got an auto increment. We'll automatically increment that to point 2. I can either store a point by placing coordinates in here, or hitting my DP button, which stands for data point, coming over in the screen somewhere, hitting a data point. It places those coordinates in there, and then I can say store point, and the point is stored. And there is my point with my plus sign and my number. And you'll notice that the command store point at this coordinate, this is the command. When that command is executed, then that particular information is placed in the output buffer. Point 1 has been stored. Now, one of the things that I have, the ability I have in this particular file, this particular area here, is that, first of all, if I want to change this, if I notice that this is the wrong coordinate value, and that should be 93 instead of 83, I can simply go into that area, type in 93, and I can hit enter. Now you'll notice the error that I get, or the message I get, that says point 1 already exists. The reason for that is that I did not have the Redefine button turned on. And like I said earlier, anytime you want to modify or change or delete a particular element, the Redefine button has to be turned on. So if I hit the Redefine button and then hit enter in this area, hit enter, then you'll see that it goes in and changes that location of that particular point, and says point 1 has been redefined. So you can actually use this area not only to, you could actually type in a command if you knew the format and execute it from here. One of the things that this does is it also keeps an audit trail of the commands that have been created or that have been executed. If I go in and say store point again, and we'll zoom out a little bit here, move this 1.1 over, and if I go back and say store point again, you'll notice that it's now incremented to point 2. And if I store some points here, just arbitrarily come out here, hit some data points, I've got 4 points stored. You'll notice that those 4 points have been stored. The commands for storing those points are up in the input buffer, and the execution of those commands are recorded in the output buffer of COGO, coordinate geometry. Okay. Now let's look at some of the elements up here, the tools we have. We have file preferences. If we go to file preferences, it's simply those COGO preferences that we looked at earlier. Now you'll notice that Redefine is turned on here simply because it is turned on in the GPK file. I mean in the coordinate geometry dialog box. If we turn that off, then it will be turned off here. Okay. We also have the input file utility. Input file utility will give us the opportunity to store. If we go to output, give it a name, but call it chain, or let's call it class. If we say apply, then it says output file class is stored. Now what that is stored is the information that's in the output buffer. All of this information will be stored in a file that can be printed if necessary. Okay. We also have the ability, if we go into this, pull this little arrowhead down, we can go down to save, and we'll call it the same thing, class. Say apply. And what that has saved is this information in the input buffer, all these commands. Now once that's saved, that can be transferred or sent to some other user or some other office, and they can take that information and reload it. For instance, if they want them to have these points in their GPK file, and what I'm going to do is simply take these, go up to the Navigator for just a minute. I'm going to delete these points. Okay. Now if I sent this to another user, then what I could do is go to File, Input File Utility, and change this to Load, and there is the input file. I could pick that and say Apply. It places that information in the file, and then I could go to Edit, Read All, and it has restored those points to the GPK file. And it will store those points in their GPK file also. The only issue here is you have to make sure, they have to make sure that the point numbers that are in that input file will not conflict with point numbers that are already stored in their GPK file. If they have Redefine turned on, then it will overwrite the points that are stored in their GPK file. So that could be a problem. We also have input file restore, which will restore that information. The database utilities. The database utilities consist of validate and clean. If we hit validate, it goes in and tells us what information is stored, in this case only 4 points. And then the clean and compress will just go in and clean out any unused information or unnecessary information in the GPK file and compress it. We also have import. We can import a GPK file. Once again, we have to be careful that this does not overwrite existing points or alignments. We can import ASCII points, X, Y, Z information. Survey data management system alignments, land XML information, RDS, roadway design system information, and then there's something in here for the Virginia DOT plot files. We can also export information from here. We can export ASCII points, SDMS points and alignments, land XML information, and alignments and profiles. And then this will exit coordinate geometry. Under Edit, we have Clear. Now what Clear does is this information is in our output buffer. We have generated quite a bit of information here in the output buffer. If there's something that we want to send to an output file, but we don't want all of this information, then we can go into Edit Clear. It puts a clear command here. It clears the buffer. It doesn't remove all of this information, but it clears the buffer so that when we do a save output, the only thing that we're going to get is what comes after the clear command. We also have, well, the delete, insert, and modify have to do with the input file information. Then read all will read all of the information just like it did whenever we loaded those commands to restore those points. We can do a type all. Now, the reason we have type all is that whenever you load a file, it's only going to load the first 10 lines of that file. If that file has 400 lines in it, it's only going to load the first 10. That's simply for space issues. If we want to type all 400 lines, then we just hit type all. Or if we only want a line range, say we want to restore the points that are located in line 57 through 76. Okay, then we can load only that line range. Okay, and then we have the text editor. Under element, we have all of our elements. We have point, line, curve, spiral, chain, parcel, profile, and next available settings. Under point, we have the utility. What the utility is, we have a line utility, curve utility. We have a utility tool for each one of the elements. If we look at the Navigator, and we're going to look at this more closely, you'll notice that we have several tools that are related to all of the different elements that we have. Each one of these, for instance, the point utility is simply a modified version of the Navigator strictly for the points. We can delete the points, we can print the points, and we can display the points. If we want to go in here and select these 4 points and say print, then that prints all of the information associated with those 4 elements. And each one of the elements has their own utility. We can apply a cell to a point, copy a point, get an elevation, equate a point to a PC or PT, put a station on a point, store a point, do point transformation. We can compare the points to the 10, and we also can set an elevation from a 10. Underline, we have utility and store. We have curve utility, copy curve, get the curve data, do a curve segment, station a curve, and then store a curve by 3 different methods, by tangents, endpoints, and concentric. And we'll look at the tangent, store from tangent, in just a few minutes. We can store spirals. We can store chains in several different ways. Store parcels, profiles, and the next available setting allows you to go in and set, if you turn these on, what this allows you to do is say, okay, P for instance, P1. The next point will be P2, the next point P3, and so on. All right. What it does is allows you to set certain terminology for all of your elements, so that whenever you go into create your first point will be P1, and it will increment up from there, and likewise with all the other elements. The view icons, this view information has to do with everything that you see in this area. In other words, your redefine this is not where you turn redefine on or off. It's where you remove or place this redefine option. So if I turn that off, you'll notice that the redefine option is gone. So if I want it back, I have to come in here and turn it back on. The view visualization will toggle off the on-off control, features, browse, edit information. And the same thing with format. If I want this information up in the screen, for instance, if I want the station decimal in here, then it places the station decimal in here, and I can change that from this area. COGO key-in field is here. If you want a beep or restore COGO window as an edit alert, can be changed there. We also have tools. We can look at the Navigator. We're going to look at the Navigator next. We can actually inverse between points. In other words, if we want to inverse through points 1 through 4, we can say inverse. Point 2 not found. Did we not? Let's see. Let's make sure that we have all those points. And we do. And we should, for some reason it's not, but we should have found point 1. Let's do inverse 2, 1 to 2. And then there is the inverse from point 1 to point 2 and the distance. We also have some locate tools. Locate traverse allows us to locate let's say that we want to locate point 5 from point 4, and we can actually choose these points from the screen. So I can go up here and select that, and it will place that point in the screen if I'm not sure what point that is. And then I can put in a bearing and a distance, and I can say locate. And you'll notice that down here in the bottom right hand section of my screen, I have located point 5. This will auto increment now to point 6 and point 5. And this is a tool that's very popular when can be used for storing parcels. If you have the information around a parcel, the bearings and distances around for a parcel to be stored, you can use this particular tool to store that parcel or store that information. We also have a locate. You can locate by angle, tangent to a curve, so you can now locate on an element. So if I have, for instance, an alignment, and I want to use that alignment on a chain, on a spiral, on a curve, I can go in and put that particular station in here. I can do it by project, and then put the offset, if I need an offset, and then say locate, and it'll actually locate that point on a particular element. Along an element, you can do a point on a curve, and elevations by profile. You can do intersect, you can do a best fit through certain points, translation, rotate, map check, roadway intersections, and then do cul-de-sacs. Redraw visualized elements. The bottom three lines here have to do with the visualized elements. We can redraw visualized elements. We can clear visualized elements temporary or clear visualized elements all. If we do that, if I select that tool, then all of the elements that were visualized on the screen are gone. They are still stored in the GPK file. And if I want to redo all of those or revisualize those, I can just select all of them, highlight all of them, and hit visualized elements, and they're all back on the screen. But once again, not drawn in the screen, simply visualized on the screen. Now, while we're in Navigator, let's go ahead and look at the navigation tool. This is connected to your GPK file. It reads information from your GPK file. It will allow you to add elements. So if I need to add a particular element, I select it here. It just says store another point. Change that to 6, and I can store a point. I can also delete an element. I need to make sure that the Redefine button is turned on. So if I want to delete 5, then I can come in and say delete. Are you sure you want to delete this element? Yes. And that element's deleted. I can modify an element. So if I need to change the coordinates for point 1, I can do this in a couple ways. I can come in here and say, I can select that element and say modify. It brings the element up, brings the coordinates for that element. I can come in and change that information and then say store point. Or I can actually come in here and change the northing or easting information right here. Hit enter and it will change the point. You can also rename elements here, as long as Redefine is turned on. I also have the same ability with lines, curves, spirals, chains, and we don't have any of this information, but all the information is available. It also gives you, if you come into this area in the dial, in the Navigator box, and you right click in this particular area, this heading area, it allows you to pick whatever you want to see in the field. In other words, if we go over here and we say curves, then you'll notice if I right click here, I've got information that's related to curves. All right. So we also have the spiral information, chain information, survey chain, parcel, and profile information. You can ID an element. In other words, if I come into back to points and I want to know what element that is, I can go to ID element, select the element, accept it, and it highlights the element on the screen. I can visualize the elements, I can print, or I can add all of these elements to a selection set. Now, I've got select and tools up here. I can go select all. I can invert the selection, and that's the selection that we have here. I can clear selection. Do a selection set. Can fit view of the selection set. And under tools, I have add element, basically the same information that I have up here under tools. Delete an element, edit, identify, print, describe, edit an element by feature, element by description, visualized elements, unvisualized elements, visualize all, the points, the lines, redraw, clear visualized elements, export preferences, in other words, the preferences that are set here, and export the selection. And all of that information, all that, those processes can be done from the Navigator. Now, let's go in, and I've stored certain information here. I've stored 4 points. If I want to use those 4 points, and we'll just run an example here. If I want to run those 4 points as my horizontal PI points, and then I need to come in and put in curves. What I can do is go to Element, Curve, Store from Tangents. So I'll move this up a little bit so we can see Element, Curve, Store from Tangents. And I get this box. Now I'm going to rename this to C1. You can call it whatever you want to call it. However, Geopak does have a problem with spaces, so that if you need a space in there, then you can use an underscore or a dash instead of a space. I have back tangent and a head tangent options here. These options are based on what type of information I've been given. In other words, if I pick this first one, then it's the PC point and direction back. If I pick this one, then it's point back, direction back, and tangent distance. So depending on what information I've been given. Now, considering that I have just my PIs, I'm going to choose this one, which is point back and PI point, and then I'm going to go to the other side and choose this one, which is point ahead. I'm going to put in a radius. I'm not real sure what this is going to look like. Let's say 500, maybe too large. I can also put in a degree of arc, chord, tangent length, whatever information I want. In this case, I'm going to use the radius of 500, and I'm going to say store curve, and we'll see what happens. All right. You'll notice that this is a fairly large curve. All right. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, do this. I'm going to come in, and it's in the wrong place. I wanted it actually to be here. Now to do that, I'm going to leave this in. I'm going to leave C1 there. The Redefine button is still on. And I want to show you how easy it is to redefine a particular element. I'm going to change this. I can pick these off the screen if I want to. I can go in here, pick that, pick this off the screen, or you can type it in. All right, now you see it's PI for C1. So what I want to do is use 3.3. This is going to be C1. This is going to be, we'll say, 100 radius, and we're going to store curve. Now you'll notice that it is removed C1 from here, moved it to here. If I want to change the radius, and I say, well, that probably could be 250. I can go to 250, leave it at C1. As long as Redefine's turned on, I can say store curve, and it will store that curve and change it. Now I can go in and say store curve 2 or C2, change these to 2. My PI now is 3. My point ahead is 4. And leave that, make that maybe a 300-foot radius, and say store curve. And now I have 4 PIs and 2 curves. And now let's look at storing this alignment, or using these elements to store an alignment. I'm going to close this box. And before we go into storing an alignment, I want to show you that if I go to Spiral and Store, I have basically the same box, except now I have the information for storing spirals. I have my entry and exit lengths and the degree of arc. Okay, so we're storing spiral, curve spirals. So let's go in and store this alignment. And to do that, what I'm going to do is go to Element, Chain, Store from Elements, because that's what I have, it's elements. So Element, Chain, Store from Elements. And I'm going to call this class beginning station. I can do a begin at 0 plus 0, 0. I can put in a beginning station, or I can do station as is, which means if I'm doing a continuation of an alignment that already has a beginning station, I can use that. In this case, I'm going to use 10 plus 0, 0. And I'm going to add my elements. Now my first point is going to be point 1. And I'm going to say add. My next two elements are going to be my curves. C1, add. C2, add. And then my last element is going to be my point. And that point will be 4. And these can also be selected from the screen. And add. Now, why didn't I use points 2 and 3? Well, that information now is incorporated in curve 1 and 2. So the elements that I want to use are this first point, these two curves, and this ending point. And I'm going to call that class. And when I hit store chain, then I have a chain that is stored through those elements. And if I go up here and close this out, and I go to, we'll just go and use our element chain utility, and I choose class and I say describe, then here is the information for my chain class. Okay, there's point 1, there's the direction, the coordinates for that first point, and the direction from point 1 to the PC of the curve. I've got my two curves, and then I have my ending point and ending station. So that is how you would be able to store a point, store an alignment from elements. Now we also have another option for storing an alignment. And for this option that I want to show you next, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just draw lines on the screen. I'm just going to draw some microstation lines. Kind of zoom out here a little bit, give me a little bit more room. And then I will come in and use the circular fillet tool, microstation circular fillet, and we'll say let's try 400, truncate both, just like this, okay, and we'll make that 300, and 300, okay. Now all I've done here is taken microstation elements and created microstation elements in the form of a alignment. Now there is a tool that I can use under geometry called Store Graphics, and that tool is right here. Under geometry, it's called Store Graphics. When I open that box, I'm going to call the job here is going to be 200. PC is our operator code. The chain is going to be class A. The beginning point is going to be point, we'll say 200, just to give it an arbitrary point, and we'll start this alignment at 0 plus 0, 0. Now all I have to do is go into ID element, select ID element, and we'll say a complex chain because that's what this is, the mode. Say ID element, select the first line, and then move away from it and continue to hit a data point until this store button becomes active. Once the store button becomes active, then I say store. It comes up and says the Store Graphics notification chain class A will be stored in job 200. I'll say OK. And now that particular line work that I placed in here just in microstation lines and curves is now stored, class A stored. And if I go into my element chain utility, pick class A and say describe, then there is the information for Class A, and you'll notice that it takes the name of the alignment and uses it to name the curves. Right. There's all my information, beginning and ending station, all the data in between. So there are two ways to store alignments, one using the Geopak and one using the Store Graphics tool under Geometry. Right. And you'll notice that now that we have quite a bit of information in here, I can utilize my arrows to go all the way back to the beginning and actually go through here one line at a time, or go all the way to the end. So this will conclude our lesson on coordinate geometry.